All right, I started to record. It's now time for Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and welcome, Valcha. I am your host, David McDonnell. Now, this particular podcast is not live. I recorded it roughly an hour or so before showtime, and podcasting the recording. Now, I had some technical difficulties with the live stream last week and the week before, so I'm going to try this instead. If the recording looks fine, then I'll replay it at 6 o'clock, and hopefully it'll look fine to you. Some folks who saw my prior live streams told me what my problem was. My problem is that I don't have a 14-year-old in the house, because anybody in their early teens could fix the problem in a hurry. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not get the live stream to function properly. So I'm going to go with the taping and do that. Now, this podcast is sponsored by Burrowing Owl Press. It's the publisher of my two books. Clandonnell, which is right over my right shoulder. It's called Clandonnell, A Storied History of Ireland. It's a collection of true stories of one Irish clan, and I use that clan to tell the history of Ireland through stories, true stories. The other book is By the Horse of Guinness, which is a little higher on my shelf. It's a collection of 8 of my favorite yarns, which I've told at Irish festivals and Irish pubs and other venues. And it's wonderfully illustrated by my friend Rob Wilkinson. I know you will, and I guarantee you will enjoy it. So please take a look at either or both books. You can take a look at my website, clandonnell.net. I planned on telling you a couple stories today, but I'm going to put those off for a week or so, because events of the past few weeks across the country has just forced me to change my theme for today. And there's been some things in public discourse which have troubled me a wee bit. And I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. I practiced law for 3+ decades in the Detroit area. And language is important to me. Language means something. And misuse of language can be troublesome. So I wanted to mention a couple. One, there's been talk about unfunding the police, which I think is a terrible phrase, which has the wrong connotation and may not be, and probably is not, what the proponents are after. There's also the overuse of the phrase, a terrible cliche, which is there are just a few bad apples, and we need to get rid of the bad apples. And if we get rid of the bad apples, everything will be okay. Now, besides being a cliche, I'm just not sure we can just nibble away at the edges of a problem and resolve it. And there are also some commentaries, many commentaries on this situation, which describe what is happening as unprecedented, as if no one has ever faced this kind of situation before. But it is indeed precedented. And to call it unprecedented is to ignore history. So I'm going to give you 2 examples, 2 Irish examples. Now, Ireland completely revamped its system of policing twice in the 20th century. This was in the 1920s for the southern 26 counties of Ireland, and again in the 1990s, the late 1990s, for the northern 6 counties. Now, before the Irish War of Independence, there were 2 police departments in Ireland, the entire island. One was the Dublin Metropolitan Police, or DMP. Now, the DMP's jurisdiction, as you might suspect, was the city of Dublin. The DMP was largely unarmed, and it was structured and patterned much like the London Metropolitan Police. Now, policing over the rest of Ireland was by the Royal Irish Constabulary, RIC. It was created in the 1830s, and it was organized as a paramilitary force. Constables lived in barracks, which were scattered around the island. They were issued carbines. They wore military-style uniforms, and they held military-type ranks from top to bottom. Now, the RIC was largely Catholic, about 80%, although percentages were lower in the northeast, and they were lower among the higher-ranking officers. But it was fairly representative of the Irish population. Now, if there was a stereotypical member of the Royal Irish Constabulary, he was the youngest son of an Irish farmer, where there was no place for him on the family farm, and there were few opportunities elsewhere in Ireland. And many of these younger sons either joined the British Army, or if they were of a mind, became a priest, or most commonly emigrated to America. The IRC, in contrast, represented steady work, although at low pay. There was chance for advancement, and there was much responsibility. And by the early 20th century, there were about 11,000 constables in the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, the constabulary did what you'd expect constables to do. They protected people from murder, from rape, robbery, assault, other serious crimes. They apprehended criminals, and they were especially good at this. And they were, in fact, regarded as one of the better police forces in the world. But they also did some things that didn't engender goodwill among the Irish people. And principally among this was enforcing eviction. I got to remember that the Irish people were tenants. Centuries of British rule meant confiscation of Irish land, giving that land to English landlords, and making virtually everyone in Ireland a tenant. And tenants could be evicted for non-payment of rent, or if the landlord wanted to clear the land for something else, or for any reason or no reason whatsoever. And hundreds of thousands of Irish were evicted over the years, particularly during the Great Hunger, when the potato famine hit, and tenants could not pay rent. And tenants who were starving suddenly were rendered homeless by these evictions. Now, it was a very easy process in a system dominated by these Irish landlords. Very simple for them to get an order for eviction from a magistrate, hire a few people to forcibly evict, and perhaps tumble or tear down the tenant's cottage, all of which was supervised by constables armed with their carbines. The other was later in the 19th century, early 20th century, there were many efforts by workers to have some sort of protection. Workers in Ireland, particularly Dublin, were overworked, underpaid, subject to abuse by employers. Female employees were especially subject to abuse, where employers could require or try to require sexual favors in exchange for continued employment. And there were many efforts by workers to enhance their rights or get any rights at all. And they involved picketing, protest, marching, attempts to organize as unions. And these were by and large crushed by the Dublin Metropolitan Police. And finally, the other issue was independence itself. There were many in the RIC and DMP who resisted the independence movement. Now, there were some who were sympathetic to the Irish Republican Army, Sinn Féin, and the independence movement. Some of them assisted in the movement. Others simply looked the other way. But there were many constables who fought against it. Now, the War of Independence, we kind of envision it when we think about it now as the IRA fighting the British Army. And that was true to a significant extent. But it was also the IRA fighting the Royal Irish Constabulary. And perhaps the highest rate of casualties during that war was indeed constables of the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, when the truce and treaty were signed, the Irish won independence, or at least the southern 26 counties, and the treaty created the Irish Free State, which later evolved into the Republic of Ireland. Now, one of the first things the independent Free State did was abolish the Royal Irish Constabulary and abolish the Dublin Metropolitan Police. And it created in their stead Gardaí Síochána, excuse me for my pronunciation, the Gardaí Síochána. It literally means guardians of the peace. So Gardaí is plural, Garda is an individual officer, it's a singular word. Now, the name change means a lot because it has a totally different connotation. Guardians of the peace. But the structure was more than a mere name change. It was a complete change in attitude. Complete rehiring. Some of the members of the DMP and the RIC became Gardaí. Some became leaders in the Gardaí. But many were not rehired. And those that were hired or rehired went through a different process of training and attitude to make sure they had the right attitude to perform their jobs. Now, the Gardaí is largely unarmed. Garda typically carries a baton. Nowadays, they carry a taser, tear gas, handcuffs for restraint. They have armed officers in the Gardaí, but they're called out on special occasions, and they're not typically on patrol. So you don't typically see an armed Garda. Now, the first commissioner of the Gardaí said in 1922, and I'm going to quote, "The Garda Síochána will succeed not by force of arms or numbers, but on their moral authority as servants of the people." Now, I won't say that everything's been utopian in Ireland since 1922. Far from it. It's seen its share of scandals, some involving corruption, some abuse of prisoners, some mishandling of investigations, all of which have been dealt with in some fashion. But there hasn't been the widespread distrust or mistrust or fear of the Gardaí in Ireland that we've seen in many communities of the police in America. So I'm not suggesting that the Gardaí should be America's model. What I am suggesting that throwing out a few perceived bad apples or adopting a few reforms may not be enough. What we may need to do is rethink our entire approach to policing and make a fresh start. And if we did so, it would not be unprecedented. All right, I'm going to do a modest commercial before I move to the north. I want to tell you about Move Me Brightly. Someone near and dear to me is a registered nurse. She works at pediatric oncology at the University of Michigan's Children's Hospital. She's made head coverings for her young cancer patients, those who've become hairless from their chemo treatment. And she made these and gave them to her patients. She graduated from that to making headbands, and some of these I've actually taken with me to Irish festivals and sold for her. And I forgot to bring one to show and give you demonstrations. But she makes these out of recycled materials. She goes to resale shops. She buys dresses and other things that have kind of stretchy fabric that she can use. And she cuts them up, sews them, and makes these wonderful headbands and head coverings out of whatever material she can find that's attractive. Now with the pandemic, and by the way, she had stretch bands and buttons and everything else to make the headgear and the headbands fit nicely and fit comfortably. And she wears these every day, so she knows what it is required to make it comfortable. Now with the pandemic, she's graduated to making face masks. And again, they're made out of recycled materials, different fabric, different designs. She gave me one that's just a plain blue because I'm kind of a plain, ordinary kind of guy. But most of them have some very interesting designs and fit quite comfortably. She's now started a buy one, give one program. So if you buy a face mask from her, she will give one to a frontline worker, nurse, first responder, whatever. So take a look. She goes under the name of Move Me Brightly. Now, if you're a Deadhead, you'll know what that is. She's a Grateful Dead fan. But go to Facebook, type in Move Me Brightly in the search bar, and you'll see her Facebook page. And send her a message. If you can't find her or want some more information, you can send me a message on Facebook or send me an email at clandonnell@gmail.com, and I'll tell you how to get a face mask from one of our first line responders and workers. Face mask, headgear, or headband, whatever you want. All right, let's move our story to Northern Ireland. Now, the same treaty which created the Free State of Ireland, consisting of 26 counties in the south, also severed Ireland between north and south. The northern 6 counties remained part of the United Kingdom. The UK, before the treaty, was formally known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. With the treaty, the UK went through a name change. It became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, the creation of the two Irelands was the preference of a majority of the people in Northern Ireland. It was not a huge majority, but it was a majority nevertheless. Now, these were people who were largely Protestant, who considered themselves British, more than they considered themselves Irish. And they wished to remain British and remain part of the United Kingdom. Now, the others in Northern Ireland, largely Catholic, would have been preferred to be part of the new Free State, and later Republican. But that was not to be. Now, with the treaty, the South abolished the Royal Irish Constabulary, as I said. The North then reconstituted its police as the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Now, they kept most of the constables that were in the RIC in the North were kept in the RUC. Although over time, the ratio of Catholics in the force dropped dramatically. Now, what followed in the North was decades of discrimination against Catholics in voting, in housing, in employment. And there were civil rights protests against this in the 1960s, and these sometimes led to some rioting. And the first riots were not so much by Catholics, but pushback by Protestants. And this led to the Troubles. And the Troubles are the description of the several decades of violence and bombings and killings and assassinations between the Protestants and the Catholics of Northern Ireland. Now, in many cases, the Royal Irish Constabulary participated in this violence on the side of the Protestants. In many cases, some cases, they actually instituted some of the riots. In others, they stood by and watched as Protestants burned Catholic neighborhoods and interceded when Catholics committed violence against Protestants. Now, it was the Royal Irish Constabulary's inability or unwillingness to keep the peace in Northern Ireland, which led to the British sending the British Army into Northern Ireland. It took years for the radicals on both sides and the vast majority of Northern Irish in the middle to be able to reach a peace. And these were incorporated in an agreement in 1998, done in Belfast on Good Friday, so sometimes called the Belfast Agreement, sometimes called the Good Friday Agreement. And there are many, many facets of that agreement, some of which have worked, some of which have not. But there's been a delicate peace in Northern Ireland since 1998. That's 20 plus years. All of which, by the way, are imperiled by Brexit. But that's another story. But one of the terms of the agreement called for an evaluation of the Royal Irish Constabulary, and that evaluation led to disbanding the Royal Ulster Constabulary and replacing it with the PSNI, Police Service of Northern Ireland. Now, the biggest difference between the Royal Irish Constabulary and the PSNI was the latter's recruitment of Catholic officers. It's now roughly 50-50. And the result of this and other police practices, the PSI has near universal respect within Northern Ireland. Now, officers of the PSNI are armed, reflecting the history of violence in the streets. They typically, almost universally, wear body armor. They carry tasers as well. But police shootings are fairly rare in Ireland, both in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland. I can't tell you why exactly, because there's probably many, many factors involved. But I simply wanted you to know that the revamping of a police force, even abolishing a police force, and creating something new in its place, is not unprecedented. It's happened. And it's been done in Ireland twice in the last 100 years. So I'm running out of time. Please don't forget to look at my website. It's clandonald.net. Like and share me on Facebook. Send me an email at clandonald@gmail.com. My books are on sale, both Clandonald and Buy the Horse of Guinness. If you haven't bought one, buy one. If you have one, give one to a friend. Clandonald, by the way, contains some true stories involving the Royal Irish Constabulary, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and the Dublin Metropolitan Police. Again, it's part of how I tell stories is not through broad general descriptions, but instances, specific people, specific places, specific times. So you get to know real people and what they did and how they lived at different points in time. So I'm going to wrap it up. Remember, stay safe, stay smart, do the right thing. Goodbye, and Schloss.